I am very clear that unless we reframe our approach to humanitarian endeavor, we will fail. And the reframing is fundamentally about taking on the fiction that the refugee crisis is a short-term crisis. The fiction is helpful for hosting countries. I don't want to name names, but Uganda, Jordan, etc. It's quite convenient that they can say, look, these people are just here for a short time. We need to provide some shelter for our brothers and sisters in the short term. But the truth is that the large majority of refugees are going to stay. Less than 1% of the world's refugees went home last year. But the fiction is also convenient for the West, because it allows them to say, we'll just give you short-term grants to keep these people alive. And essentially, we as a large NGO, we're a $750 million organization now, the IRC, we are trying to tackle long-term problems of violence against women, poverty and unemployment, ill health, with short-term grants, which is crazy. So it's changing that mindset. What does that mean? I think 4 things are really important to change the mindset. 1, we should be saying that the expectation is that adult refugees are able to work. If you're displaced for an average of 10 years, you need to be able to work. That is only going to be possible if countries like Jordan that are supporting hosting refugees are given massive economic support. Jordan is pegged to the dollar. Jordan has an IMF program. Jordan has debt that's gone up from 54% to 96% of national income. And they've got 650,000 registered refugees. So they need a different kind of offer from the World Bank, the IMF, the international aid donors. At the moment, they're on short-term drip feed of aid. And they say, well, hang on, the King of Jordan can say, I've got a 33% youth unemployment problem among the Jordanians. So if I'm going to let refugees work, I need to ensure that my own population gets properly helped. Now, of course, the truth is, if you say refugees aren't allowed to work, that just means they don't work officially. They work in the informal sector, which drives them underground, which has its own problems. So actually, there's a safety benefit, a protection benefit, as well as an economic benefit from regularizing that. They become taxpayers. So there's an employment challenge. We can say more about that. Secondly, the saddest statistic that I've discovered in the last 4 years is that half of all the refugees are children, and less than 2% of the humanitarian budget goes on education. Less than 2%. It's a total scandal. It's also incredibly stupid if you think about it. There are 250,000 Syrians in Lebanon who've never had any education since they left Syria. It's not just a moral scandal, it's strategic stupidity. So we have to take on the idea that education is a luxury, not a lifeline. The first thing that parents will say to you after they check, that they tell their relatives that they're alive when they land in Europe is, where can I get education for my kids? Third aspect of this is maybe a bit surprising. I mean, it's obvious if you think about it. What is the thing that refugees lack the most? Cash, money. They don't have, if you're a Syrian refugee, you don't have access to your Syrian bank account when you leave. The basic idea that since refugees are living in urban areas, they need to pay rent, they need to buy food, the best thing you can give them is not food parcels, the best thing you can give them is cash. Not necessarily literally wads of dollars, but you can do it electronically, you can do it safely. It's a very powerful way of empowering refugees. It's also a powerful way of bringing economic benefit to a local community for hosting refugees, because they are paying rent, they are in the shops. And the fourth element of this, and the final element, is we have to win the argument that welcoming a small number of refugees to our own shores is a symbolic and substantive contribution to the fight against the refugee crisis. And it is, I can say this because I'm not an American, I observe your politics, it's a tragedy, a real tragedy, that the country that has the most successful refugee resettlement program, a bipartisan program for the last 30 years, welcoming about 90,000 refugees a year to the US, 90,000 out of the 25 million. So we're not talking big numbers, not big compared to Uganda. It's a tragedy that that program should be being strangled, frankly. I mean, the administration said that they were going to put a cap of 45,000 rather than 90,000. Actually, the figures that we published last week show it's your country, you're going to end up with a maximum of 15,000 refugees coming this year. It's a complete scandal. Effectively, refugee resettlement, which means meeting the family at the airport, getting their kids into school, getting the adults into work, teaching them English, giving them a car loan. We published a paper on this, that the car loan repayment rates among refugee families are higher than for American families. So 98% of the car loans that we issue to refugees, people often say to me, well, what's different about being a refugee resettlement agency in the US than elsewhere? And one thing is that you have to help people get cars. You don't have to do that in Europe. The 98% of the car loans get paid back compared to 88% of car loans for a control group. It's a tragedy that that program is being strangled. And it is being strangled. We run 26 offices around the US, including in West 33rd Street here in Elizabeth, New Jersey. And it's slowing to a trickle, the number of people who are being allowed in. And people often say to me, well, yeah, it'd be cheaper though, let's keep helping the refugees in Jordan. Why should we bother to have them come here? And the answer to that is, one, for some of the most vulnerable refugees, actually a new start in life is what they need. Two, it's a symbolic stand with countries like Jordan, because it's one thing for the King of Jordan to say, yeah, America's given me money, and then someone says to him, yeah, but the Americans are refusing to take any refugees. If he can say, well, no, actually they are stepping up, and Europe's stepping up, and others are playing their role. And thirdly, as I'm sure there's family stories in this room, it's actually good for the country. I mean, the refugees become productive and patriotic citizens because they know the price of living in a country that doesn't give them the freedom to think as they want and develop as they want. So my point in rehearsing those four aspects is to say, the argument that this crisis is unmanageable is actually not true. That's just not just a counsel of despair, it's just it's fake news. And the truth is that it is manageable if we do some basic things in a more sensible and focused way.